So there were some beautiful comments in the chat about uh, prayers for people in various disaster areas, Gaza, hoping the peace there, people suffering from the fires, the wars actually, Ukrainian war. And clearly, we're in a time where just, our Buddhist tradition is very clear that difficulty, challenge, change, suffering of various kinds are part of life. And the tradition exists to help us respond to the challenges of life as effectively as possible. So there's always pain and sorrow, but somehow it feels like there's more lately, that the world has erupted in many ways from, from the wars that people have mentioned in the chat, to natural disasters, to the climate change that so many are worried about, to the political divisiveness. There's a lot that seems to have exacerbated in recent years. And we're clearly facing major threats. And their ecological threats are so great that they really imperil us all. And so there are many ways of responding to these, but some people are pessimistic and give up. Others are techno-utopians and assume we'll invent our way out of these issues. And some just have throwing up their hands. But it's clear that the outcome is not foreordained, and the outcome is largely up to how we choose to respond. So what I'd like to do today is explore with you how we can respond most effectively to the challenges, the crises, the craziness of our time, and how we can look below these surface turmoils to identify the underlying mind states from which they are arising and which they express. And together explore how we can contribute in our own unique ways. So what I'd like to do is to offer some questions for reflection and to offer some general principles which help us understand the great challenges of our time. And then offer a practice which will empower us to respond as effectively as we can. So first, I want to just suggest that I assume that everyone in this group is very sensitive to the suffering and challenges we face, and that every one of us is opening in some way to the question, what can I do? How can I, in my unique situation with my contacts and skills and capacities, what can I do? How can I contribute? And it's a beautiful question. It's one which opens us to the world's pain and calls forth our own care and compassion, because compassion is born out of an undefended openness to other people's pain, or the world's pain. But it's really important as we reflect on this, and all of us, I assume, do, it's important to know what kind of question this is, because there are two very different kinds of questions. There are knowledge questions and there are wisdom questions. Knowledge questions have a one-time answer. They just need a piece of information, like, is it raining outside? Look out the window. That's the end of the question. You have your answer. But wisdom questions are more like, koans. They're questions which you can keep asking. And each time you ask, they have the potential for taking you deeper into the question, deeper into yourself, and deeper into life. And the question, what can I do? How can I contribute? Is a wisdom question. So it's really important to know that there's no one-time answer to it. That it's a question which hopefully we'll be asking for the rest of our lives. And the answers will deepen as we deepen. And they'll open as we reflect and open ourselves to the question. Well, that's a beautiful question and can be a life-changing one. But there are three others that seem really crucial and which can deepen our exploration. And the second question is not just what can I contribute, but what do I feel called to contribute? And this question recognizes that each of us is uniquely sensitive to some forms of suffering and uniquely inspired by some kinds of action. And we're far more likely to be energized and impassioned and stay with it if we're doing work, if we're acting in ways which we feel real juice in, if we feel inspired by. So each of us is called to listen for and respond to our unique call, our call. So what do I feel called to contribute? And again, it's a wisdom question. There's not a final answer. There can be a deepening series of answers. But one implication of this second question is the recognition that service doesn't have to be sacrifice. It can and ideally is joyful. And a bringing of joy to others and a deepening of it in ourselves. There's a third question, and that is, what's the most strategic thing I can do? Again, given my unique situation, capacities, talents, what kind of contribution will leverage my offerings for the optimal impact? As Archimedes, the Greek inventor, said, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough and I'll move the world. That's what we're looking for. Our particular place to move the world. And many of you are probably familiar with the trim tab principle, a metaphor introduced by Buckminster Fuller, the great genius. And Buckminster Fuller spoke of optimizing our impact by, he used the example of the rudder at the back of a big plane. If you look at, say, a 747, there's this huge rudder on the back. And there's no way you can move that rudder by hydraulic pressure when it's moving at 500 miles an hour. There are tons of pressure on that sail. But if you look at that rudder, at the back of the rudder is a little rudder. That little rudder is a trim tab. And you move this little rudder one way, the big rudder moves the other way, and the whole plane moves. So trim tabbing is an example of applying force at the optimal location so as to maximize your impact. And Buckminster Fuller's tombstone has on it, call me trim tab. And Buckminster Fuller was a wonderful example of finding what one could do with one having a maximum impact, because Buckminster Fuller in his 30s was having a very hard time. He'd lost a child, his business had collapsed, he was broke, and he stood on a bridge, tempted to throw himself off. And he describes having an epiphany, a really powerful moment in which the question came to him, he asked, what would make life worth living? And the answer that came to him was finding out how much good one person can do. And that's what gave him his inspiration for life. Running the experiment with himself as the subject to find out how much good can I do. I call it the Buckminster Fuller game. And of course, it's closely related to the Bodhisattva aspiration. The Bodhisattva aspiration has a particular kinds of good, not only good in the world, but good in awakening and, and cultivating one's inner world. So Buckminster Fuller's game of how much good can I do leads us into the fourth question, the final question, which is, how can I live my life so as to be an optimal instrument of service? And now we're looking not just for a single contribution, but for a lifetime of contribution. And to do this, to really have a lifetime of optimal contribution for us, not optimal contribution for someone else or some grandiose plan, but what we can do requires us to recognize the deep roots or the source code of our crises and craziness, so as to recognize what truly helps. And so what I'd like to do now is just give a few principles for understanding the nature of the challenges we face at this time in the world and what that implies for how we can contribute most effectively. So the first thing we need to know is to recognize the nature of the challenges we face. If we look around at the world, what we recognize is that now, for the first time in human history, all the major challenges, all the threats to our societies and even our civilization are human-caused. And this is a first. Our technological power is now so enormous that we have shaped the world according to our own psyches. The wars we see are the result of envy, jealousy, anger, hatred. The pollution we see is a result of greed and unconsciousness. The nuclear weapons are a symptom of fear and aggression. We look around and we see that all these things are mind and human created. And what we realize is that the state of the world reflects the state of our minds. And as the state of the world reflects the state of our minds, because our technology has become so powerful that we can basically shape the world. We have become nuclear giants and technological wizards while remaining ethical infants and wisdom adolescents at best. We're like the sorcerer's apprentice with enormous power and little maturity. So what this suggests is that what we call our global problems are actually global symptoms. They're symptoms of our individual and collective psychological immaturities and dysfunctions. And what that implies is that if we are to heal the world and remedy these crises and challenges, we're going to have to work at two levels. We're going to have to, for example, find ways to feed the hungry and reduce nuclear stockpiles and stop wars. But we're also going to have to work on the psychological dysfunctions and immaturities which created them in the first place. Otherwise, they're just going to pop up in new forms as they have throughout history. We have to treat both the symptoms and their causes. That suggests the nature of our work. Because once you see that, then you see that the contemplative practices we're doing actually are profoundly needed because they're cultivating the very qualities of heart and mind that are so needed. They are reducing the so-called poisons from which the problems arise. They're cultivating qualities such as sensitivity and clarity and compassion and insight, which allow us to be more effective in the world. So this work we're doing, this contemplative work, this spiritual practice, meditation, is valuable not only for us, but also in cultivating the very qualities and capacities that are needed to work on both levels. And that is another principle, is that's the nature of effective responses in our time. Effective responses address both the symptom and the cause. That is, we treat the symptoms in the world as effectively as we can, but we simultaneously want to work on the underlying psychological and spiritual dysfunctions which created and perpetuate them. So we're called on to do two things. We're called to, first, to work on these outer problems and to, again, the second question, what do I feel called to do? Well, we're called to work, whether it's, contributing to feeding the hungry or doing whatever we can to address any one of the great issues we're facing, and the minor issues too, of course. So we're called to do three things. First, to heal the outer problems as best we can, or to contribute in whatever small way we can to healing the outer problems. We're called to contribute in whatever small ways we can to healing the inner psychological and spiritual dysfunctions that cause them. And the third thing we're called to do is to develop ourselves, to practice, so as to foster the very qualities that enable us to be more effective instruments of service and help and healing. That's a lot. It would be nice if there was, any one of those three things was a lot. But to do all three of them, we've got lives to live and jobs to hold down. And so the question comes up, well, it'd be really nice if there was some way of combining these. And there is. There's a particular way of practicing that integrates both the work in the world, the contributions to the psychological and spiritual dysfunctions, and cultivating our own capacities and qualities. And that's the ancient practice of what's called karma yoga in Hinduism. It's the yoga of work and action in the world, in which it's the practice in which we use our work in the world as our spiritual practice, as the focus for our learning and growth. And we can break the practice of karma yoga down. Karma yoga, well, let's first just simplify and say karma yoga classically is described as having three components. One is we do whatever we do, not for ourselves alone, but we offer it to some higher purpose or good. Traditionally, it was offered to Brahman, to God. So that is before beginning any activity, one offers it to God, or Brahman, that it may be an expression of what that will, the greater will. But one can offer it to any transpersonal aspect of being. One can offer it to the welfare and awakening of all. Anything which is transpersonal, beyond transegoic, beyond our little egoic motivation. The second component of the classic description is one does the work as impeccably as possible. And third, one simultaneously releases attachment to the outcome, to how it turns out. That's that which makes this such a knife-edge practice. And we can expand on this, and I want to do so to give a fuller account of this practice of karma yoga. So let me suggest the following principles. Before beginning an activity, if you want to turn your life into karma yoga, and karma yoga is the practice for people in the world. Those of us who aren't in monasteries, basically, if we want to be really serious practitioners, we need to be karma yogis. We need to be using each of our activities for our learning and growing and awakening. So to do karma yoga, I suggest these steps. Before you begin a major activity, whatever it is, before you begin your day's work, perhaps, or perhaps before you begin a meeting, or before you begin a trip of some kind, just stop for a moment. Just stop and take a few breaths. Give yourself the gift of a moment to become present and to reflect on what you're going to do and why. Okay. And then, after a moment of reflection, just offer whatever you're about to do to whatever transpersonal source or aspiration or ideal moves your heart. Okay, whatever I do today, at work today, may I benefit each person I come in contact as much as I can. Whatever. Third step, you attempt to do your activity as impeccably as you can. Really go for it. Really, okay, if you're going to turn your work into a day of service, can you, to what extent can we hold to that and really smile at each person or be kind or whatever it is? Fourth principle of karma yoga, be mindful. Bring as much awareness to your experience in each activity as you can. As you do your work, you're going to have all sorts of experiences. You're going to notice your behavior. You're going to have emotional reactions. You're going to deal with other people's reactions. In this way, each moment becomes a learning opportunity. Fifth principle, work with any experiences that arise. Particularly painful emotions and reactivity of one kind or another. Because each of these, each reactive moment, each painful emotion, is pointing to an attachment of some kind. This is, of course, the second noble truth, that suffering is a function of attachment. So we can turn this second noble truth into a moment-by-moment practice by noticing our reactions as they arise. For example, we fear we won't get the outcome we're attached to. We become angry with people who stand in our way. We get embarrassed if we're not looking good. All of these are pointing to attachments of one kind or another. And just all you have to do is just notice them. Bring as much mindfulness, awareness as you can to them. Allow them to be there. Don't judge and condemn them or yourself for having them. Just let them be there, notice them. And simply by bringing awareness to them, they begin to decondition and release. And at this stage, you have turned psychological pain into feedback, into something valuable. Now, the sixth step is kind of the knife edge of this practice. That is, as you're working for whatever aspiration or goal or good you're doing this activity for, release attachment to the outcome. Now, when we're doing something good for the benefit of people, for our own growth, our own learning, to reduce suffering, it's very understandable to get attached to the outcome, to having things turn out the way we want them to, and the way we think they should. But that's a generator of suffering. So our practice with karma yoga is this dual process of working as impeccably as we can for the highest good we can, while simultaneously letting go of attachment to how it turns out. And that's what makes it such a knife edge. And just to be aware that a lot of us have a belief that we need our attachments in order to do the right thing. That is, if I'm not attached to doing good and contributing, I won't do it. But one of the beautiful discoveries of practice is that we are innately trustworthy, and that we can let go that top dog, demanding, judgmental, critical superego. And then we find ourselves not acting out of superego compulsion, but rather out of transegoic compassion. Seventh step, and the second last one, after you've done your activity, take a moment to stop, reflect, and learn, just as we did at the end of the sitting. Take a moment to reflect and see, what did you learn from this? What can you take away? How could you do it better? How could you respond more effortlessly, joyfully, helpfully? And finally, step number 8, offer the benefits of the activity for the welfare and awakening of all. And that's what we did at the end of our sitting. We offered the benefits. We visualized or mentally intended for everyone to have the benefits we gained, like giving them to everyone, with the paradoxical effect that they actually strengthen in our own lives. And when we do this, then gradually we winnow away the overlay of fears and faulty beliefs and dysfunctional neuroses. It's a way of gently wearing away and releasing all our dysfunctions of various kinds. And as we do that, then gradually we come to have glimpses of our true nature, our deeper nature. And as we do, we recognize that we've spent our entire life suffering from a case of mistaken identity. We are much more than we thought. In fact, we're more than we can think. And as we begin to taste that deep identity, we recognize that that same identity is who everyone is. And so now, the bodhisattva aspiration, the desire to help and heal people, becomes a natural expression of our true nature and a natural response to the recognition of the true nature of others. We're doing sacred service, or traditionally called karma yoga. And we recognize that this is naturally what we want to do when we realize who we are and who others are. And when doing sacred service, we go deeper into ourselves in order to go more effectively out into the world. And we also go out into the world in order to go deeper into ourselves. So it's this beautiful cycle. And we continue this cycle of learning and awakening and serving until they become spontaneous expressions of our true nature. And then the universe or the Tao or Buddha nature or God, then this Buddha nature learns and awakens and serves through us. Buddha nature serving Buddha nature. What a beautiful recognition. So, I think it's time to turn it over and have you comment or question in any way you'd like. Let's see, is Brahmavir Amruta, are you raising your physical hand for a question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Dr. Roger Walsh, I'm so blessed to see you. I've read your books. I am in East Bay. My name is Amrita. Did you mention Karma Yoga?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, that is from Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, indeed.
Work is worship.
Yes.
If you are not in practice, treat if you are a psychiatrist. Am I right?
Yes, guilty. Yes.
Do your worship work as you are doing the service of the Almighty God. That is what I feel. That is what I did in my service. I'm not a psychiatrist. I cannot read the mind, but do your service as if you are serving the God. Karma yoga. Thank you very much. I don't want to take your time.
Thank you very much, Brahmava. Yeah.
Yes. Roger, I wonder if you could mention some of the books that you've written and
Maybe one to start with. I know you have written a lot.
Maybe one that would be relevant for this group would be the book Essential Spirituality, the Seven Central Practices. And that's a survey of the practices, the qualities of heart and mind that are said to be essential to living fully and as wakefully as we can. And also it overviews the practices that cultivate those qualities. So that might be one.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sharon.
Roger, a question came in on the chat too, and that 722 Penny asked, can you talk about the relationship between being strategic and letting go of results?
Yeah. Yes, our ego thinks that we'll only be effective if we that we have to have the outcome that we think is most desirable and strategic. And that may or may not be true, that one of the paradoxes of acting in the world and of service is we never know how it's going to turn out. We never know all the ramifications of what we're doing. So we act in, we're part of the great mystery, this boundless, bottomless mystery within which we live. And within that mystery, we act as strategically and effectively as we possibly can with our limited knowledge. And simultaneously, while doing that, let go attachment to the outcome. And we find that we can act as effectively as we can or strategically as we think we can, and simultaneously do it from a place of non-attachment, which allows us to be calm and clear and not reactive. So it actually makes us more strategic and effective. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Sharon, we're going to ask you to unmute. And she has a question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm talking to you from Canada, and I'm wondering, Roger, at this time, I'm sure I'm not the only one finding it particularly stressful, knowing that there's so much suffering in so many different parts of the world. And then also with the upcoming inauguration of your new president, which is particularly stressful as well, with all its ramifications. What are you personally doing to weather this? How are you getting through this? What's your game?
Well, at the moment I'm on vacation in Hawaii, so that helps.
Sure.
But unfortunately, I can't stay indefinitely. So in a couple of days, I'm heading back. Yeah, I think we can use the karma yoga to speak to this and say that, yeah, first off, this is challenging. The amount of suffering in the world is very painful, and it's, we could talk about this. We could have a whole session on just how to hold the world suffering. But perhaps it would be helpful just to say that I'll speak for myself. I personally had a very mistaken idea of what compassion was for a long time. And when I started doing compassion practices full-time in retreat, just cultivating compassion, I remember a few hours after starting, this thought arose, I've misunderstood compassion all my life. I thought compassion was feeling, suffering with the person. But what I found was that true compassion, and my teachers had told me this, but I just didn't get it. True compassion is more a beautiful feeling of loving care, that the wish that the suffering could be relieved, but it's not a suffering oneself. It's more of a loving care. So I think so that's one thing. Another is to just look as, what's, this is such a tricky, difficult one. So thank you for bringing it up. yeah, to look at what the beliefs are that we have, the shoulds, specifically the shoulds about the suffering. This is in no way to say we should not, care and respond, but it is to say that often when there's almost invariably when there's suffering, there's attachment and there are shoulds of one kind or another. So in a very brief response, I'd say those are a couple of things which come up. Just be aware of the possibility that compassion may not require the kind of angst that we feel. And also just explore, what are the beliefs underlying the pain I'm feeling? Yeah. And I don't want to belittle the difficulty of this. It's easy to say. It's long-term work to work through, but yeah.
Thank you.
Roger, we might have time for one more question from Elaine. So I'm going to ask her to unmute. And Elaine, if you could possibly turn on your camera, that would be great too.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Walsh. I have a strange connection that might, if I turn on the camera, might just cut off the connection. So forgive me for not coming in person here. My question is and first of all, thank you so much for this. Is just very beautiful, wise talk. I'm curious about one of the practices you gave us with choosing a figure, and maybe a trait to merge with. And what happened was quite unexpected. And the person who came to mind was the Dalai Lama, and I was thinking about kindness, and doing this practice of trying to merge with that, kind of expecting to feel a particular way or feeling kind. And what happened was really surprising to me, and I just felt this incredible joy. Didn't plan on it, didn't expect it.
The mind has a mind of its own.
Almost overcome. And, I've worked a whole day. I've been up since 5 a.m. and was really tired and just kind of quietly listening. And like all of a sudden there's like, oh, the state I was in that I thought I was in was clearly not the state I'm in. And I don't quite know how to totally explain or verbalize it, but what was very surprising was the practice, and like my expectation had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. And the mind has a mind of its own. And, we do the practices, and over time they cultivate particular qualities, but in any single experience, almost anything can arise. So, in some ways, the way we work with it is the same. We just bring awareness to it and open to it and let it be there. And if it's a positive experience, it will build and grow, or tend to. And if it's a disruptive emotional reaction, it will tend to heal and release. So, yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you for this incredible gift and practice.
Beautiful.